I think for me, I would say, I feel like I'm going to answer my own question with like a different answer or question.
We're the host of the podcast. You can do whatever you
I
like.
can do whatever I want. Welcome to the LeadrPulse Podcast, the podcast with actionable insights for leaders revolutionizing the world of work. I'm Holly Tate, the Chief Marketing Officer here at Leadr, and on today's episode, Matt interviews Randy Wootton, who's the CEO of Maxio, and they unpack this idea of what it looks like to have the patience enough to grow in your career from individual contributor to manager to director, VP, all the way up to executive, and how to balance that with learning and growing and getting promoted, but also earning your stripes along the way. So take a listen to this episode with Randy and Matt.
When you think about the people listening to us, the people that want to grow and develop, that want to grow in their careers, that want to take on leadership roles or leader of leaded roles, and then eventually maybe even being an executive or an entrepreneur or a founder, what advice do you have for them as you think about them growing and developing? What do you want to share?
Well, one of the things I talk about is operating at the edge of my own ignorance. And I think that it is, a lifelong learner, people will say, but it's being deliberate and intentional every day, every week, every month to read a book, go talk to a mentor, go to a conference. How do you keep pushing that boundary of what you don't know so that you learn more? And I think if you operate with that idea of humility and ambition, sometimes people think of it as a bad word, but if you really do want to move forward in your career, you need to be ambitious about learning what you don't know. That needs to be counterbalanced by have some patience. And what I mean by this is everybody, when they're an individual contributor, thinks that, well, I got to go be a manager, and then I got to be a director, and then I got to VP. Each of those are specific stages in a career progression. And I think it can, if you're too ambitious, you jump into that first manager role and you start talking about, now promote me to director, rather than thinking about, okay, what does it mean to be the very best manager I can be? And so I describe it as horizontal skill development and vertical advancement. What are the components that you're building on that foundation that enable you to take the step forward to become a director? In my experience, and some people will scoff at this, but I think it really takes 3 years to earn your spurs as a manager. You have to hire someone, you have to fire someone, you have to go through performance management, you've got to set them up for success, coach them, put them on a PIP. That doesn't happen in your first year. You don't even know what to do your first year. And so by the end of your third year, where you've had these different scenarios, these different experiences, you can then say, oh, okay, I've earned my spurs as a manager. Now, how do I really become a great manager? And then I think there's a very bright line between being a manager and being a director. Well, what does it mean to be a director? How do you go talk to VPs who can help you understand what a director is? How do you work on director-like projects to demonstrate that you're already directing strategy, resources, impact to the business? And so I think there's this, understand where you are, understand where you want to be, and recognize that it's going to take time and effort on your end. No one's going to give it to you. So you got to build the expertise through, again, books, courses, experiences, and having people mentor you.
So good, Randy. I mean, so much gold in there. Thank you so much for sharing. You're an incredible leader. And I'm sure there are a bunch of people right now being like, I want to be on Randy's team. So
call me up. Send me. I always like working with great people. So send me a LinkedIn.
It.
Would love to hear from you. And I do think, look, the biggest joy I get is out of working with a group of people to solve really difficult challenges. And I'm sure it's the same for you. And this is what's so fun about being in the startup scene is what we're doing, no one's ever done before. Now, I'm not curing cancer. I totally get that. Yeah. But what we get to at the end of this period of time, this journey that we've been on, this mission we've been on, is my hope is people will look back on this experience and say, that was the biggest impact on my career ever. I grew like I never thought I was. I got to do things I never thought I would be able to do. And I was set up for the rest of my life.
So good. Randy, what's your website? And then what's the name of your podcast as well?
Yeah. Site is maxio.com. You can find me on LinkedIn at Randy Wootton. And then the podcast we're doing is SaaS Expert Voices. It's bringing people like you, Matt, and other experts who have a point of view on what does it mean to build, grow, run SaaS companies.
It's awesome. I love it. Thanks so much for being here today, Randy.
My pleasure.
Okay, Matt, agree or disagree? Do you think that it's harder to go from like a director to a VP than it is from like an IC to a manager?
Ooh. Director to VP or IC to manager. It was more of a cultural shock going from IC to manager. I was much more surprised at things like the burden and the weight that you carry and what happens behind the scenes that I had no idea of what happened. Personally, though, for me, the growth curve from going to director to VP was higher. So I was surprised more with the IC to manager jump, but the learning curve of like actually understanding all the intricacies that come from being a VP and being an executive, that took me much, much, much longer.
I think for me, I would say, I feel like I'm going to answer my own question with like a different answer or question.
You're the host of the podcast. You can do whatever you like.
I can do whatever I want. Okay, so for me, it didn't feel like a big jump. I think it's easier to go from already a manager to a more advanced manager, except for when your downline grows. So what I mean by that is like, so like for me, here at Leadr, when I started, I was a 1-person team. Then I grew our marketing team to like, I think 6 people at one point. Then I expanded my sphere of influence and acquired like half the company in my downline. So I went from like 6 people to 40 some odd people overnight. And so that for me it wasn't like a hierarchical change. It's more of like, I guess, responsibility or amount of people change. And so my span of care expanded very, very quickly. And that personally was the hardest leadership thing I've ever done.
Makes sense.
Because
and you also have more people to lead through, like you're further from the front lines.
And that is what has been the biggest challenge for me in my career so far is I am very comfortable leading small teams of direct reports. That experience where I had multiple layers of leaders underneath me was challenging. So it was interesting. So it was less about title and it was more how many people were in my downline.
Well, it's easy at that point for things to get lost in translation and for you to be like, wait, I never said that. How did that message translate all the way down? You know what I mean?
Yes. Or to get impatient, like Randy just said, the ambition versus patience. I was like, oh, I've arrived. Like, I'm now responsible for all these things. And so I think what he was saying was like, it's easy for us to get impatient of want to be promoted to the next thing. However, I also think you have to grow in your patience the more your responsibility grows, because it just takes longer. Change management takes longer. You have to get more people bought in. So like, whereas when you're leading a small team, if I just have direct reports that report to me, I can grab everybody, put them on a Zoom, explain exactly what I'm thinking, run really fast. And I love that. When I have multiple layers to go through, it's like, it feels like I'm walking through molasses,
I get it. And I think it's probably disheartening for people to hear, but Randy literally said it takes 3 years to earn your spurs at every jump. That's not a one-time thing. So first of all, if you jumped into a role and you expect to be promoted into a manager role, or once you're in a manager role, you think you're going to figure it out in a short period of time, sorry to break it to you, Randy reckons 3 years. What do you think? Is that about right?
I think in a perfect scenario, sure.
Yeah.
I just don't know that that's realistic for the younger generation. Like I think about Generation Z, there are very few Gen Zers that I know that would wait around for and here, let me caveat, who actually want to be in leadership. I think there are folks who are like, I don't want to lead people. I want to be like, I think vertical advancement. Well, actually either way though, I don't know many Gen Zers who, whether it's vertical advancement, like becoming a specialist, like an engineer who wants to grow into a senior engineer, et cetera, but doesn't want to lead people. That 3 years is a very long time these days.
I agree. It's a super long time.
With him, I just don't know that it's realistic.
So even if it's not realistic though, it's just going to take you that much time to get comfortable in your skin, maybe.
Yes. And maybe you'll make mistakes or feel feel ill-equipped for 3 years.
Well, I think what happens is, you think you're prepared and you think you're going in eyes wide open. But especially if you've been a top performer in your individual contributor role, no one's had to have difficult conversations with you probably ever in your career. No one's ever had to sit you down and talk to you about basic things like, I don't know, coachability and humility and not being a gossip person and not being a negative Nancy, like things that maybe are happening behind the scenes to other team members that you don't know about. Happen all the time, and you start sipping and imagining like, wait a second, no one's ever had to give me feedback because I just naturally did that, and now I'm expected to give it to other people when it's never been modeled to me. That was one of the most surprising and hardest jumps that I had to make. I'm like, I thought this stuff was just, I don't know, I just thought it came naturally.
Yes. And I think that's where, if you are listening to this and you want to expedite those 3 years, I think that practice, role play, what Randy said, like meet with directors, or, if you're wanting to go from IC to manager, meet with managers. And the more that you can get, whether you call it practicums or just, like little mini internships in your current role, that is so helpful, so that when you do get into the role, you won't be surprised of how uncomfortable it can feel. Because I've been a leader now or a manager for what, I don't know, 13 years. And I still get uncomfortable giving feedback. Like,
Right.
It doesn't get easy.
Yeah.
You just get more comfortable with it, I think.
Yes. Yeah. It especially the longer you get to work with people, you build just a lot of trust. I don't think you ever arrive at the point where you don't have some butterflies going into those conversations, though. That growth curve never goes away.
Yeah. And then what I'll end on here is, I just really appreciated what Randy said about horizontal skill development versus vertical advancement. That is a really good way to think about it. I think especially the horizontal skill development, I think a lot of people neglect, but as a manager, that is, I think, some of the, that's where the most sideways energy comes. Literally, that's why they call it sideways energy, because it's horizontal across the business.
Yeah.
And as a manager, it's not just about managing your downline. It is about managing across, and peer accountability, and having a healthy conflict. And that is, I believe, the hardest part as a manager, much more difficult than just leading your downline. And so what can you do to work on your horizontal skill development as much as you're working on your vertical advancement?
I totally agree. It's the idea of like, what's the saying, Holly? Is it master of what? None. Jack of all trades, master of one.
That's what it is.
Yeah, it's like sharp enough to be dangerous. You don't have to be the best in every discipline, but know enough to answer the right questions and not get the wool pulled over your eyes. There's a great saying that says, VP of one thing, VP of anything. Once you've learned how to kind of carry yourself and communicate and to plan and to read a budget and to forecast of one discipline, you could almost do it in any discipline. But to your point, you have to have a general breadth of knowledge. You have to understand the fundamentals of how that business unit functions. Otherwise, it'll be like you're just speaking different languages and you're not really going to understand what's happening in that world. And that's when the sideways energy, to your point, happens.
Yeah, so true. Okay, so quick recap of our actionable insights. Number 1, be ambitious, but also patient, because it's going to take at least 3 years, according to Randy, to really get your feet underneath you as a manager. And then the second one is work on your horizontal skill development as much as your vertical advancement if you want to grow in your career.
Bingo.
Well, thanks, Matt. I think that sums up pretty well of how to go from manager to leader in this crazy world of work that we're in.
Love it. I love it.
Thanks for listening to the LeadrPulse Podcast, the podcast with actionable insights for leaders revolutionizing the world of work. We hope you enjoyed this episode with Randy Wootton. Be sure to follow him on LinkedIn, where he posts all of his hot takes. And if you're looking for more from Leadr, we encourage you to go to our website, leadr.com, Leadr.com, where you can sign up for the LeadrPulse newsletter that we send out every single week and stay updated here on the LeadrPulse Podcast.